This is Edward Bernays, an evil genius who used the methods and techniques of wartime propaganda to invent modern marketing.
Everybody else's tobacco is poisonous. Lucky Strikes is toasted.
In World War I, it was pretty clear where this information was coming from. And today, we might be getting messaging that we don't quite necessarily recognize as propaganda.
In this video, I'm going to tell you about the insane history of the man who invented propaganda and then weaponized it to make vast fortunes for the largest companies in the world. And you would be forgiven if you've never heard of him before. However, if you've ever seen an influencer tout a supplement line, considered that a country might stage a false flag operation to sway public opinion, heard anything about Sigmund Freud, or listened to someone explain that cigarettes could help them lose weight, then you've been living in Bernays' world all along.
What my father understood about groups is that they are manipulative, they're malleable, and that you can tap into their deepest desires or their deepest fears and use that to your own purposes.
It's hard to know where to start with Bernays because his career begins in the first decade of the 1900s and stretches all the way to the 1990s. He died at the age of 103, and every one of the eras where he was active bears his signature fingerprints. He began his career as a promoter of Broadway shows before he was conscripted into the propaganda wing of the U.S. Army selling war bonds at the outbreak of World War I. Now, it's hard to believe now, but at the time, Americans were isolationists who were largely against backing wars in foreign countries. So his job at the Army's Committee on Public Information aimed to convince Americans that self-sacrifice, mostly eating less and contributing money to the war effort, was their patriotic duty. Later, he helped design flyers that would be dropped in enemy trenches meant to convince hungry German soldiers to surrender their arms in exchange for warm meals. Now, the thing that made his work so effective in wartime is something that you and I would see as almost comically obvious today. He made the connection that you can change someone's actions by playing to what they want to feel instead of what they actually need. And after the war was over, he used that key insight to fundamentally change the world.
When I came back to the United States, I decided that if you could use propaganda for war, you could certainly use it for peace.
This is how the field of public relations was founded. And the key thing to understand is that before Bernays, advertisements in the media were straightforward. They assumed that you would only buy something when you needed it. For instance, if you wanted to take pictures, Kodak had a camera to sell you. Meanwhile, the first car ads convinced you that maintaining a horse was just too much trouble. Even Coca-Cola prided itself most on its thirst-quenching abilities. His innovation was how the act of buying something fundamentally changes who you are as a person. Consider, if you will, any car commercial today.
Love, it's what makes a Subaru a Subaru.
Or Coca-Cola, emphasizing how drinking it will help you make friends. Or how taking pictures with your new iPhone will make you feel good.
When I push, I feel good. When I push, I feel good.
They're not really selling cars or Coke or cameras. They're selling the idea of how a product will change your experience of reality itself. This seems crazy obvious to anyone in marketing today, but it was a sea change for the industry in 1921. And of course, cigarette companies were the first ones to bring Bernays' insights into the mainstream. In 1929, the tobacco company Philip Morris hired Bernays to create a campaign that would encourage women to light up. At the time, only 5% of women were smokers, and Philip Morris saw room for improvement. They asked Bernays, who noticed that there was a wave of feminism sweeping the country, so he hijacked it. He hired a handful of women to smoke publicly at an Easter parade in New York as a form of protest against the patriarchy. For being able to smoke should be something that is available to all people, regardless of gender. He told them to call the cigarettes torches of liberty. Then Bernays invited reporters to stoke fake outrage, and thus a conversation about women smoking in public was born, and cigarettes, oh, they were sold. Hitching women's desire for parity with men to cigarettes didn't do much to advance the cause of women's rights, but it did supercharge cigarette sales to women. Smoking rates among women doubled in less than a year. And a few years later, he helped brand Virginia Slims as a way for cigarettes to help women lose weight instead of going for a sweet. Along the way, he coined the phrase, a second on the lips and forever on the hips, which is now practically an anthem in anorexia chat rooms to this day, and was even repeated on an episode of Friends in the 1990s.
Last night I was finishing off a pizza, and she said, "Ooh, a moment on the lips, forever on the hips."
And this is all just the tip of the iceberg, a history that you were already probably maybe a little bit aware about. However, we're about to get into a place where truth is truly stranger than fiction. There is one thing about Bernays' family history that is going to blow your mind, something that made me, someone who came very close to getting a PhD in the social sciences, rethink a whole lot about what I thought I knew about the impact of scholarly research. And it's this. Bernays is the nephew of Sigmund Freud.
Sigmund Freud is on the right.
Right there.
And he is traveling.
That's you, isn't it?
That's me there.
And this is weird for a whole lot of reasons. First, because of how Freud's theory about the subconscious plays out in Bernays' marketing techniques, but even more so for how Bernays is the reason that anyone knows about Freud outside of Austria at all.
Facing bankruptcy, he wrote to his nephew for help. Bernays responded by arranging for Freud's works to be published for the first time in America, and began to send his uncle precious dollars, which Freud kept secretly in a foreign bank account.
He was Freud's agent, if you will, to get his books published. Well, of course, once the books were being published, Eddie couldn't help himself but promote these books, see that everybody read them, make them controversial, emphasize the fact that, do you know what Freud says about sex and what he says cigarettes are a symbol of and so on and so forth? How do you suppose all those stories got out? Certainly the academics weren't spreading these around the country. Eddie Bernays was. Then, when Freud became accepted, well then, of course, to go to a client and say, well, Uncle Siggy, see, then that had some cachet. But notice there, first Eddie created Uncle Siggy in the U.S., made him acceptable, secondly, and thirdly, then capitalized on Uncle Siggy. Typical Bernays performance.
That clip is from an amazing documentary series by the director Adam Curtis called The Century of Self, and I've used several pieces from it while putting together this report. If once you're done with this video, you want to know more about Bernays and more importantly, how Freud and Bernays interacted, I'm going to suggest that you cue that one up right now. When I was watching it for the first time, I had to hit pause on that quote and think about what they were saying for a second, because absolutely everyone has heard of Freud as the preeminent psychologist and psychoanalyst in world history. He's the guy who invented the idea of the subconscious and pioneered the study of dreams. Heck, if you ever took a psychology class in college, you probably read some of his books. The story that we tell about Freud is that the influence of his work grew organically in psychological circles before breaking out into the mainstream and going global. But this turns that whole idea on its head. Freud was basically a broke academic in Austria with maybe a little bit of regional cachet, but he was only taken seriously as a global academic after the world's most powerful publicist took the case. In other words, the publicity tail wagged the scholarly dog. And it makes me wonder how many other academic theories this is true for as well. Do theories gain traction because they stand up to the rigor of the academic process, or because a marketer manipulates the public to think they were influential, which causes scholars to follow along? Of course, this is exactly what Bernays did with cigarettes when, in addition to what I already mentioned about their campaigns, he also manufactured the idea that cigarette smoking was healthy by getting doctor endorsements.
Yes, according to this repeated nationwide survey, more doctors smoke Camels than any other cigarette.
Much later in his career, Bernays went on David Letterman and joked about how exactly that scam worked.
All right, now, doctor, tell me again what the doctor is. What are we dealing with here? You're the father of public relations.
What we're dealing with really is the concept that people will believe me more if you call me doctor.
Oh, I see.
In other words, all someone needs to do to gain influence in the world is first don the trappings of respectability, and the actual respectability, it follows suit. This is backward from how we think the world should work. Faking it until you make it doesn't make you qualified, even if it is regrettably effective. Bernays was hardly keeping his technique secret. In 1929, Bernays codified his ideas on manipulating public opinion in a book titled, and you can't make this up, Propaganda. I did a video a few months ago about how the self-help gurus Mel Robbins and Shetty manipulate their audience's emotions to get them to work for free, and I traced their present-day techniques all the way back to Bernays' book. So many viewers wanted to know more about Bernays that I decided to put together this video, which is just a subtle hint to you to tell me down in the comments below what you think I should work on next, because sometimes I really do listen. Anyway, the worldview he lays out is actually pretty bleak, stating that there is a complex relationship between psychology and democracy and corporations where invisible stakeholders shape the information people have access to and their values and consumer activities through propaganda. His main concept, which he terms engineering consent, is that it's the job of these powerful stakeholders to make people believe they're making decisions on their own while their actual actions are being controlled. Or, to put it in his own words, the conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our country. We are governed, our minds are molded, our tastes formed, our ideas suggested, largely by men we have never heard of. Are you ready to start sounding the deep state alarm bells yet? That a shadowy group of rich people are actually controlling your mind? Well, Bernays would think that you are both smart, savvy, and probably very attractive if you agreed with him. But let's get back to that relationship between capitalism and propaganda. He notes that there is a delicate dance between investing in building production capacity on an industrial level and the necessity to prepare demand to make investments pay off. Quoting him, "A single factory capable of supplying a whole continent with its particular product cannot afford to wait until the public asks for its product. It must maintain constant touch through advertising and propaganda with the vast public in order to assure itself the continuous demand which alone will make its costly plant profitable." In other words, public relations and propaganda are the life force of the consumerism that powers the American economy. In the almost 100 years since this disastrous ideology took hold, the world transformed away from a needs-based economy into a vast consumer-driven monstrosity that produces mountains of useless crap that gives us just brief moments of happiness before ending up in landfills. Instead of building an economy based on needs, getting rid of your horse because the car was more efficient or drinking a Coke because it's thirst quenching, Bernays hijacked our nervous system's penchant for resource gathering into a monster of endless consumption because buying things was a magical force that transformed you as a person. In Freud's terminology, Bernays activated humanity's libidinal forces to fuel a particular vision of consumer demand and capitalist enterprise that ultimately served the richest and most powerful people in society. But wait, because it gets worse. Because right after the book came out, some very important people in Germany took an immediate interest. Adam Curtis again.
But the Nazis did not see this as a return to an old form of autocratic control. It was a new alternative to democracy, in which the feelings and the desires of the masses would still be central, but they would be channeled in such a way as to bind the nation together. The chief exponent of this was Joseph Goebbels, the Minister of Propaganda.
Es mag gut sein, Macht zu besitzen, die auf Gewehren ruht. Besser aber und beglückender ist es, das Herz eines Volkes zu gewinnen und es auch zu behalten.
Goebbels organised huge rallies whose function, he said, was to forge the mind of the nation into a unity of thinking, feeling and desire. One of his inspirations, he told an American journalist, was the writings of Freud's nephew, Edward Bernays. In his work on crowd psychology, Freud had described how the frightening irrationality inside human beings could emerge in such groups. The deep, what he called libidinal forces of desire, are given up to the leader, while the aggressive instincts are unleashed on those outside the group.
In retrospect, this should have been a red flag for anyone considering following Bernays' lead. I mean, this is what President Eisenhower, a general against the Nazis, specifically warned against in his presidential farewell speech.
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes.
Unfortunately, while the world eventually overthrew the death cult of Nazism, it doubled down on the mind manipulation that Bernays pioneered. It wasn't long until Bernays started advising the government itself. Bernays mentored American presidents and even the CIA throughout the Cold War. The most atrocious example of many examples came in 1950, when the United Fruit Company was upset that the democratically elected leader of Guatemala didn't want to be a colonial holding of an international corporation anymore. He was skeptical of how United Fruit had turned a huge proportion of Guatemala's population into fruit slaves. So, United Fruit hired Bernays to sort out the situation.
He organised a trip to Guatemala for influential American journalists. Few of them knew anything about the country or its politics. Bernays arranged for them to be entertained and to meet selected Guatemalan politicians who told them that Arbenz was a communist controlled by Moscow. During the trip, there was also a violent anti-American demonstration in the capital. Many of those who worked for United Fruit were convinced it had been organised by Bernays himself. He also created a fake independent news agency in America called the Middle American Information Bureau. It bombarded the American media with press releases saying that Moscow was planning to use Guatemala as a beachhead to attack America. All of this had the desired effect.
The Sultan of Spin was at it again, and this time he convinced the American public that anyone who opposed American imperialism was a commie. Shortly after his publicity stunt, he helped the CIA stage a false flag operation and then a coup, which deposed the leader and planted Marxist literature throughout his residence. You know, typical Cold War stuff. Above all else, Bernays created a form of marketing that used emotions to manipulate vast crowds of people to do the bidding of his powerful clients. His techniques changed the very nature of the global economic system by making us believe that our individual desires originated within ourselves instead of with his own planned messages. In other words, he made a group of people think and act in unison by making them believe that they were all really individuals thinking and acting for themselves. And to make sense of what this really means, I want to turn to the work of the radical social theorist Herbert Marcuse, who, in 1964, wrote the book One-Dimensional Man. We are again confronted with one of the most vexing aspects of advanced industrial civilization, the rational character of its irrationality. its productivity and efficiency, its capacity to increase and spread comforts, to turn waste into need and destruction into construction. The extent to which this civilization transforms the object world into an extension of a man's mind and body makes the very notion of alienation questionable. The people recognize themselves in their commodities. They find their soul in their automobile, hi-fi set, split-level home, kitchen equipment. The very mechanism which ties the individual to a society has changed, and social control is anchored in the new needs which it has produced. Wow. The ideology of consumerism is the Ouroboros, the snake eating its own tail. Marcuse's now 60-year-old book still rings fresh to anyone who has ever contemplated the subtle effectiveness of the ads that you see in your social media feeds. The soullessness of the social media business model is merely the logical completion of the project Bernays started more than 100 years ago. The companies that own the means of distribution today, the very platform where you are watching this video, serve you a nonstop stream of personalized advertisements that make you feel like you're a special person if you just buy the right product, apply the right discount code, or embrace a unique fashion choice. And though Bernays could never have conceived of the computing power that we have here today, we know that those same drives are being hijacked by super powerful AI to make subtle changes to our political opinions and the way we act with the community at large. Or to put it in the words of one such tech overlord, the CEO of the surveillance company Palantir, Peter Thiel,
maybe you could actually unilaterally change the world without having to constantly convince people and beg people and plead with people who are never going to agree with you through technological means.
The world we live in today is the world that Edward Bernays gave to us. From the way we think about what science is ascendant to our political motivations and our consumer choices, it's hard to know where you, the individual, ends and the marketing impulses we've been fed begin. It infects everything that we think is authentic and unique about ourselves, and instead feeds us the sugary byproduct of authenticity in the form of whatever purchasing power you're able to muster on behalf of the people who can pay marketers. And with that happy thought, I want to thank you so much for watching this video and letting me subtly enter your mind and influence the neural connections that make you tick. Hopefully they're ticking in a slightly more healthy way than they did before. And since we are talking about what products do to you, let me subtly suggest that supporting this channel is one way that you can keep at least independent journalism like this alive and thriving. I'd love you to go check out my free newsletter. Yeah, it's actually free. It's called Magnetic North. It's over at Substack at sgcarney.substack.com, where you will get my thoughts delivered right to your inbox. But I also have a paid upgrade. It's my premium subscribers. They pay $8 a month and they get early access to my videos. There's an online chat community. And there's that warm, fuzzy feeling that comes from being an ever freer thinker. I can't promise you that I get everything right all the time, but I do put in my best effort and even correct my mistakes when I catch them. If you want to check out some videos related to this one that I put out recently, I'd love you to do a deep dive on the wicked recent history of Palantir, the Peter Thiel-backed surveillance company that has taken Bernays' ideas and pushed them to the outer limits of what pulp sci-fi authors ever dreamed. Or maybe, if you didn't catch it the first time, the video I did on Mel Robbins and Shetty that inspired me to make this. Until then, from PokeBear LLC in Denver, Colorado, this was Scott Carney Investigates the Evil Genius, Wartime Propagandist, Edward Bernays. Thank you so much for all of my supporters on Patreon and on Substack who make this work possible. The contributions you give keep this sort of independent journalism on the air, and I really just could not do it without you. If you want to get early access to my work and get your name on the honor roll right over there, please sign up at the links down below. From PokeBear LLC in Denver, Colorado, this was Scott Carney Investigates.